What's up, guys? Who Needs Meta here, coming at you with another retro deck profile. Today we're going to look at Jeff Jones' Psychic list that got second place at YCS Toronto in September of 2012. September 2012 is one of my favorite formats of all time. It is heavily underrated. The beginning of every format is typically like the Wild Wild West of you don't know what's going to happen. The ban list isn't figured out. Like, people haven't solved the format, obviously. We're right at the beginning. New stuff hasn't come out yet. Like in this case, we hadn't got Abyss Rising, which would be a few months down the road, but we did have Return of the Duelist, which did include Grandsoil, the Elemental Lord, which was the key focus of this deck outside of the Psychic monsters. They essentially just kind of fueled the graveyard in order to drop our Grandsoil. So I really like this format up until Abyss Rising, and even through Abyss Rising, because I feel like there's just so many decks that can do well, and you will get to that when we get to the side deck and we show off all the other decks of the format. Yes, this was Shocklock Wind-Ups, and I'm understandable that people don't really like Shockmaster, but because there's so many ways to play around Shockmaster, there's so many things that are bigger than Shockmaster, I just feel like this format doesn't get the love it deserves, and we've kind of shown that with the different profiles that we've done so far. But I just feel like there's just so many things that can do well, and the deck variety is insane, which for us, the amount of replayability a format has is solely based in how many decks can do well. I guess that's why Edison format is so popular, because you can play multiple things and do well. There's only so many Teledad mirrors you can play before it gets uninteresting, I guess. So even though that mirror is really good, and the same thing with like Perfect Circle, but there are like 4 or 5 decks you can play in that format that are also awesome. So we'll get right into the list. For me, why I think this deck did well is because no one knew how to play against it. The format prior, I was playing both the Wind-Up Loop and Full Power Injectors, and a couple months into the format, I just kind of got bored with it, and I was like, I'm going to play TG Psychics. Why not? It's a combo deck that can play a bunch of stuff. So I kind of knew what all the Psychic cards did, but a lot of people just didn't. They didn't know how to play against the deck, and there's a difference between learning a deck via playtesting and having to learn it in 3 games of a YCS when you're facing a really well-established, well-known player. There's the intimidation factor of that, of not wanting to misplay. There's the infamous story of Jeff getting his opponent to make a misplay by talking what he should do, and causing him to burn his opponent with Fairy Wind back in like Clee format. So there is those, mind games and stuff like that. Like, Jeff is obviously a very, very good player. He also did mention in his deck profile that his Grandsoil was never warninged, never bottomless, never trench, the opponent never was able to respond to it. So that does have a little bit of, the luck factor. Where did Jeff just get really lucky? I mean, obviously he's a great player, so there is that kind of factor involved where no one was ever able to respond to his Grandsoil, and this card is nuts. It just wins the game whenever you can resolve it. So let's get into the list here. Of course, we have our 3 copies of Grandsoil, the Elemental Lord. It is a Monster Reborn from either graveyard when you have 5 Earths, which is really important. The other graveyard is really, really important, because of the fact that you can take out of your opponent's graveyard and then drop another one. So if you go Grandsoil, target an Earth monster in your graveyard, now you're down to 4. If you have double Grandsoil, you can go, okay, Grandsoil, target from your opponent's graveyard, take something, drop another Grandsoil, grab something from your graveyard, and then you can push for game that way, which is really important. We have 3 copies of Serene Psychic Witch. This is the main Psychic monster. Whenever it's destroyed, it allows you to float into another one during the game's next standby phase. Another Psychic monster in the deck, including itself. It doesn't say except itself, which is really important. So that allows you to, if you need a level 3 non-tuner, you can float into another one based on what your hand is. We have 2 Wizards. This is a really cool card because it banishes and it can't miss timing when we return the monster to the field, because it's a mandatory effect, so that you're able to synchro summon and the monster will still hit the board. And the card that we're typically summoning here is 1 copy of Esper Girl. When it is banished, it banishes the top card of your deck face down, and when it leaves the field, you can add it, or you add it to your hand, and so it is a tuner, so you can essentially float into this with either of these 2 monsters, and then you will be able to trigger the effect. This is the 1 card in the deck you do not want to draw. This is the card we want to summon from our deck with Witch, and then later with Wizard. And then the next monster we have is Psychic Jumper. Psychic Jumper, you pay 1,000, and then you can creature swap anything your opponent has. It is better than creature swap because you can choose the monster your opponent controls. The only downside is it doesn't say except this card. It says except Psychic Jumper, so that you can't target, if you have 2 copies, you can't just use one to target the other. But it is a teleport target, and a lot of times you're just giving your opponent Witch. So essentially you'll just either summon a Witch and then teleport this out, or vice versa. Give them the other one, and then run the Witch over, and then you'll trigger the effect during your opponent's standby phase, and that'll allow you to either bring out another Witch as like a chump blocker based on what your opponent's thinking, and then get another monster again on your turn, which is another reason why Witch is so important, that you can target itself. So if you run over one during your turn, and then you can banish one, and then special summon it during their turn, they run it over, and then you can get whatever you need on the next standby phase after that. And then the last Psychic monster is Commander. I don't think this card is that good. It is important to note that it is able to be summoned off of our copies of Giant Rat, which is another reason. It's a level 3 tuner, and it's under 15, so it can be summoned off of Giant Rat, which is kind of the important factor here. Rat kind of turbos out most of the deck, which is interesting. It's actually really funny that this deck, of all things, loses to a card we play, but Grand Mole really dunks on this deck, because if we don't have teleport, we need to resolve Witch, we need to resolve Rat to get more than 2 monsters on the board when we're struggling to maintain anything like that. But I do like the Mole in this deck, because you can summon it off Rat. So if your opponent has like a big monster and they attack into your Rat, you can just go get Grand Mole from the deck. It's really good if they like make Zenmaines and then attack into the Rat. You can just go get Mole and then bounce it off their board. And then the other Last Earth monsters is 2 copies of Card Trooper. We can, again, get these off of Rat, and it's a beat stick. Same thing with this guy here. We could just, again, these are just, they essentially are all 19, but Card Trooper fuels our graveyard, and this card says draw cards. But the card fuels our graveyard so that we can get to Grandsoil faster. We play a few defensive monsters in Gorz and Double Trag. Trag's really cool because of, again, we have a lot of monsters, so our hand size is typically pretty big because we only have 1 normal summon per turn until we decide to like go off. So that Trag can get pretty big while we're saving our Grandsoils in our hand for our big push. And then we do play hand traps. We play 2 Maxx. It's an Earth for Grandsoil, and it's really important for going second against both like Wind-Ups and like 6 Samurai, as well as 2 Veilers. The important part of these in this deck especially is because we don't play any defensive cards at all. We don't play any trap cards outside of our overload. So we want to be able to make our opponent's MSTs as dead as possible, as well as like baiting them into using MST, because we can essentially plus off that, and we can simplify the game set by getting more and more cards off the board. So Maxx and Veiler are really important in that they're a defensive card that can be played against the Shock Lock, but they're also can't be hit by like MST like a standard trap card would. So that's it for the monsters. It is 25 monsters. The main deck is 41 cards total, so 25, 15, and then 1. For the spells, the obligatory and obvious 3 copies of Teleport. Again, this is the card that went to 3 on the ban list, and then it is kind of the reason we can play the deck. The deck was playable at 2, but 3 definitely helps out, especially with the neutering of things like Dino Rabbit and then Tragoedia 2, and all of that allows for more things to function. 2 copies of Miracle Synchro Fusion. Again, this is the other thing where we can bait our opponent. If it's destroyed while it's set, you get to draw a card. So if your hand is bad, your opponent doesn't know what your deck does. Nowadays, you would either cut this card or play 1 of it. Jeff even said he would rather play 1 because the card can just brick, and it kind of conflicts with things like Grandsoil, but it does banish things from your graveyard in order to make Grandsoil more alive. We have a bunch of different ways that we can manipulate our grave, whether we have too many or too few to get to that 5 number and an OTK. The target off of this, the ultimate Axon kicker, this card is nuts. So it is valid for using this. But when I play this deck, I actually cut one of these because I'm never setting it like most people would be. Like Jeff would be able to set this and his opponent would space it thinking, okay, I have a target for my space, and not knowing. And now we just have the knowledge that you don't space against this deck. You're not going to hit anything relevant, at least game 1. 2 copies of Pot of Duality. This card was semi-limited on the September 2012 ban list. A lot of times we're just summoning Card Trooper, setting Witch, and again, this is a deck that, like 6 Samurai, needs 2 cards to do things. So I really like Pot of Duality just like as hand correction and things like that. And then one Pot of Avarice again with 25 monsters. We're going to be fueling our graveyard pretty quickly with card troopers, and we're going to float with Witch, which brings out monsters. The deck just has a ton of monsters, so we're going to be able to use Pot of Avarice pretty quickly. One Mind Control and one Creature Swap. Mind Control is really good for synchro plays. We have to play a bunch of random generic monsters in our extra deck, like your generic synchros and things like that. But Creature Swap, it's really good against decks that typically put out a boss monster. A deck that might, like Dark Wolves that might sit on a Grapha, or Heroes that'll sit on Shining, or Rabbit that'll sit on Lagia, or Dolka. This deck does have a hard time with Dolka, so a lot of times they'll go with that over Lagia, so you can just Creature Swap for it, which is really good. But against Wind-Ups, they're just going to give you just nothing. If they do the shot, they're going to give you the Butterfly or whatever, which is bad. So you side this out against Wind-Ups, which is why he didn't play more of it, and why I can understand not playing more of it. But it's okay against Wind-Ups, not really. And it's good against other things. And then the Staple Trinity. Dark Hole, Reborn, and Heavy. And the last spells are 2 space, but Jeff said he wanted to play Lances over this, but honestly, I really like space to be able to hit like Factory and things like that, and Gateway. I just really like the MSTs. And then, of course, our lone trap card is the Overload, which allows us to shuffle 3 Psychics and draw 2. So it's draws cards and it's Pot of Avarice. So a mini Pot of Avarice, I guess. But yeah, Psychic Overload is really good in this deck because it draws cards. And Going Plus is really important in a deck that needs 2 cards to do anything. For the extra deck, we have our 2 copies of Axon Kicker. The fact that it can't be destroyed by battle or card effects. And then it has the level 8 Synchro, our copy of Thought Ruler. It has kind of like that effect as well, where it gains life. So I really like that. The card's really good. Again, if you only play 1 Miracle Synchro Fusion, you get to cut one of these cards, and you don't have to. You can put something else in the extra deck that you think would be better. I typically cut one for Leviair. He didn't play Leviair, but I think Leviair is really good for just like having just banished Earths and things like that, which is really good. He has to play a Synchro, like a Psychic Synchro for every level. So for 5, we have Android, and then 6, 7, Lifetrancer. The effects of all of them outside of Thought Ruler just aren't really that good. I mean, being able to look at your opponent's hand and like it's pretty good, but like you're not going to be able to guess unless it's a deck that plays a crap ton of monsters, or they've only searched like if they go summon a gadget, add a gadget, and then that's the only card in their hand. It's like, okay, I know what that is, but like at the same time, like most of these are just for Miracle Synchro Fusion. But I really like Thought Ruler. I mean, this card's nuts. So, and then you have to play generics because of our Jumper and Mind Control and things like that. You have to play like a generic of every level because you don't know what you're going to be getting back based on what they have on the board. So Catastor, Gaia Knight. Gaia Knight's actually really good because it's an Earth monster and we side deck goes in match. Black Rose, generic 7. It's the best 7. And then 1 copy of Scrap Dragon. Again, this is an Earth. I guess that's why I played over Stardust that, and you can trigger your Witch off of it because it doesn't matter how it's destroyed. So you can use Scrap Dragon to trigger Witch and get through it that way. And then the last 2 Synchro monsters are Beast and Barkion. Barkion's really important in order to protect your Grandsoil. So if you go Barkion, they have to have Warning or Judgment in order to stop it. And so that's where it's really important to be able to do that. And then for Exceeds, Zenmaines, just a generic kind of stall here. Leviathan Dragon as a beat stick, and then it's also important to have a free detach that would get you your fifth Earth. And then Soul of Silvermountain, it's an Earth. It stops back row. You can play Temp Tempo if you don't really like this card. I like Soul of Silvermountain, but Temp Tempo is also an Earth, and I like having as many options as I can when I'm trying to play against Wind-Ups, and being when you're goes and matching them, and as well as Dino Rabbit. Those are decks that you would typically goes and match. And then we'll get into the side deck here. Let's take a look at some of the decks we would be siding against. Of course, the deck that won the event, the aforementioned Shockmaster Wind-Ups. This was probably the best deck of the format. But there are a lot of decks you can play in this format, which is why I really like it. So this is probably going to be the most I've ever shown in terms of decks we're siding against. We have, of course, Heroes. Heroes getting copies of rank 4s and things like that. Really important for that deck to be even better, to have more options. There's like the Skill Drain build, there's the Bubble Man build, there's just the generic Hero Beat build. We had gotten a structure deck for 6 Samurai, so I really like Samurai in this format. We will go over I believe his YCS Indie first place list at some point. This deck is just nuts. It would become more of an Exceed build. We would be dropping things like Dojo for Asceticism because there are so many good rank 4s that we could go into, including our Exceed here, which would, again, give us a Magatama and make that live. Dino Rabbit would still be played, even though with the limitations on Rabbit. Agents that were both popularized by Alistair Albans and Simon He. I did Simon He's list. Alistair Albans' list was mostly focused on Card Trooper and Call the Haunted and Milling Christia and using Christia to lock your opponent out of the game. Robbie Cole did well with Machina Gadget. We also did that deck profile as well. And then there was Geargia Karakuri. There was also a Machina Geargia, or Machina Geargia list. I really like Machina Geargia. As well as Geargia Karakuri, that did well at this event. If you guys want me to profile that, I'll probably look at that as well. There was a top 4 Machina Geargia list at that event. But Geargia Karakuri, again, Chris LeBlanc also won a YCS with that during this time frame. So there's just so many decks. I didn't include Dark Worlds or anything like that. There's just a lot of stuff that we could be playing against. I believe Billy Break actually ran Geargia Karakuri at this event as well. So we have 2 copies of Cyber Dragon and the Chimeratech. This is, again, for all of our machine matchups. There was one other event that was like a machine, like a light machine with Gallus Monster Mash deck that also did well at another event. And then we have one Kinetic Soldier. This would hit, he said it was for heroes, but we would come to find that Samurai would also be really good in this format. So this card also is really good against Samurai. And then the last monster is the third Maxx. It's an Earth. It's good for going second against windups. You need to be able to have something. The only spell he cited was the third space. I like it to hit Gateway, hit Factory, as well as just clear the board for things like that. Because you want to be able to just OTK. This deck just wants to OTK as quickly as it possibly can and end the game. Even though it has a decent grind game, but once you start getting to where Grandsoil is dead, you're going to be having a very difficult time to come back. So we want to try and mitigate that by just dropping our Grandsoil and winning. We have 2 copies of Gozen Match. This card is really good against windups and against Rabbit. Again, another card that's also really good against those decks is Needle Stealing, or at least against windups. Against any like combo deck that needs to put a bunch of monsters on the board, Needle Stealing is really good because it's a chainable out. So if they go first and do the whole lock, you can set this and then flip this before they can call traps if they have all their monsters on the board. So, because a lot of times they'll end with the Boat, the Shockmaster, and the Butterfly, and that's 3. And it only hits face up, so if you set Witch and you flip this in standby, your Witch is fine, and then all 3 of their monsters are gone. 2 copies of Crevice in the different dimension. This is just, it's good against Insectors. Again, Billy would do well with Insectors in this format to hit the Hornet. But it's also pretty good against Dark Worlds. If they summon a monster and then they try and go to bounce for Grapha, you can just get the Grapha out of there. And then 3 copies of Roll Decree. Again, we play 1 trap. So any deck that plays a heavy trap lineup, and this is another reason why hand traps are really good in this deck, because we have access to Roll Decree, we don't have to worry about actual traps, and then we can use our hand traps to mitigate the game the way we see fit. There will be some duels in the description below, as well as the full deck list. Be sure to like and subscribe for more retro format content. Let me know if there's any other interesting decks from this era that we'd like me to cover, and thanks for watching, guys.